Florida's death row about to see more inmates. Today, Governor Ron DeSantis signing into law a bill that now no longer requires a unanimous jury to recommend capital punishment. And tonight, our Capitol reporter, Forrest Saunders, joining us live from Tallahassee. And Forrest, you would think this would be something that the governor would want to call a big news conference to announce, but this bill signing today was pretty low key.
Absolutely, Paul. I mean, this is a lot of what we've seen from Governor DeSantis recently, especially with some of the fairly controversial policies. Instead of doing one of those giant press gatherings in front of a supportive crowd, this was a pretty small group of people, some legislative leaders and some other stakeholders, just behind closed doors in Governor DeSantis' office. Take a look. It was just a handful gathered to watch Governor Ron DeSantis sign SB 450 Thursday morning. Effective immediately, Florida juries will no longer need unanimous consent to offer the death penalty. A supermajority, 8 of 12, will do. Judges could still override, but need to explain why in a written order. In a tweet, DeSantis said, quote, "Once a defendant in a capital case is found guilty by a unanimous jury, one juror should not be able to veto a capital sentence."
How do you wish to plead?
Guilty.
The change comes after the Parkland shooter was spared the death penalty last year. It fueled frustration at the Capitol, prompting the reform.
It's unfortunate that this case highlighted this flaw in our law, but now was the time for us to get it right so other families do not suffer in this way.
Speaking of families, those who experienced Parkland said Thursday's signing was bittersweet.
Of course, it's a double-edged sword. Our families were denied the justice that my daughter Gina, her 13 schoolmates, and her 3 teachers deserved.
Tony Montalto among them, now hopeful future victims won't have to endure his heartbreak and frustration.
It's about providing the victims an opportunity for justice. Gina, her classmates, and her teachers, they deserve that.
Critics have pointed out that Florida is a national leader in death row exonerations, prompting some lawmakers to push back on the change as lowering an important hurdle.
The threshold to convict someone is unanimous, and that's just at a conviction level.
Rep. Michelle Rayner-Goolsby, a defense attorney, among them.
And when we're thinking about taking someone's life, no matter how egregious the crime that they may have been charged with and convicted with, you would think that that threshold needs to be just as high.
Republicans, however, had the votes needed to make the bill a reality earlier this month, even grabbing a few Democrats, sealing the policy's fate in the legislature and opening the door for DeSantis to make it Florida's latest law. Now, there are some third-party groups out there that are really concerned about this legislation. Among them, Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Officials said in a statement today, quote, "This new law will be immediately challenged and there will be extensive litigation, plunging the system and victims' families in particular into decades of uncertainty and chaos." Paul?
And Forrest, this was one of those bills that was essentially along party lines, the few exceptions today being the Democrats from Broward County where the Parkland shooting happened. But it also comes at a time when DeSantis seems to be losing a bit of his national momentum, and pretty fast this week. Several Republicans from Florida have already announced that they're going to endorse Donald Trump over the governor. So what happened this week with DeSantis, and how will that impact how he governs going forward if he even decides to run against Donald Trump?
Well, there's no doubt that the governor's position is not as good as it used to be when it comes to running for president in 2024. But that is due to a couple of factors. I mean, one of the things we kept hearing from political experts over and over again is if he waits until after the legislative session, that's going to put him at a disadvantage because of timing. He's not out there able to collect the funds that he would want, the endorsements that he would want. And then, of course, you had that curveball of former President Donald Trump being indicted, which has really become a rallying cry for a lot of Republicans. It's all put him at a disadvantage. Now, as far as governing, I mean, if he goes out there and he runs and he fails to win the nomination for the Republican Party, he's going to return to Florida with potentially a diminished position. He has largely helped craft some of the big legislative goals each year since taking office, but we might see the legislature exert some autonomy over the governor and kind of do its own thing. which is something that they haven't been doing as DeSantis has had that bright, hot national spotlight on him. It really depends on what the base thinks if DeSantis comes back to govern after an unsuccessful run.
Yeah, there's already been some reports of pushback among the legislative leaders there in Tallahassee this week against the governor's agenda. But, Forrest, we got to talk about the thing that woke a lot of us up in the middle of the night last night, that emergency alert test pushed out to cell phones at 4:45 in the a.m. The Division of Emergency Management says the alert was supposed to be done on television, not through phones. And the state just today, in fact, a couple of hours ago, ended its contract with the third-party company that handles those alerts. And you heard from one of our local leaders today who wants to ban any tests from happening overnight.
Yeah, that's right. Spring Hill Republican Senator Blaise Ingoglia, you might have seen his tweet this morning, kind of poking fun, saying that he wanted to introduce a bill called the Stop Wake Act, a play off a piece of policy from last year. But when we caught up with him later in the day, he said he's actually pretty serious about this. He'd like to come up with some kind of policy that maybe he could amend to a bill that's already running in this legislative session and get it across the finish line and to the governor before the legislative session is out here in the next 15 days. He hasn't come up with the specifics of the policies, and we don't know what that would look like yet, or announced a whole bunch of supporters for it. But obviously a lot of people were ticked off this morning when they were woken up at 4:45 in the morning, myself being one of them. So we'll see how that develops as well, Paul.
All right, Forrest Saunders live in Tallahassee.